All right, Cowboys found themselves winning a close game. It was a dogfight from the beginning, especially after the Cowboys looked so promising in the opening drive. The final score being 27-23. Nevertheless, when you look at everything that the Cowboys did in this particular game, it still wasn't enough to appease everyone. Now, the Cowboys did put up 404 total yards. They were able to get over 120 yards rushing. Nevertheless, the Cowboys had desperation football toward the latter part of this game, and it was down to the last minute. I always tell people, play through the echoes of the whistle, right? Well, literally, Dak Prescott didn't look the way that we wanted him to look in this game. Of course, 2 interceptions, uncalled for, right? Ball bouncing off of the body. And Dak Prescott said, yes, he tried to force the ball where it didn't belong. And on top of that, when we start talking about life for the opposing team, 3 phases of a football game. And on special teams, we had Kevontae Turpin muffle the ball, gave life to the Texans, and they were able to rally and punch the Cowboys right in the mouth. It got to the point whereas the interceptions and also the short field, the Texans were able to capitalize off of those things to generate 14 points. Now, it goes like this. In a game of football, it's any given situation, right? It's cool when someone else does it. It's a problem when the Cowboys do it. When we pull out ugly games and win it, I know we look back and we open up old wounds of the Cowboys for 26 years of things of what we didn't accomplish, right? And they say, well, these are the same old Cowboys. Nevertheless, as long as there's time still on the clock, you have a right to continue to fight, Cowboy Nation. And I get it. We didn't play up to par. The Texans, they won. They won the time of possession with 33 minutes. We only had the ball for 26. And on top of that, if you really contextualize this defense, their ability to get down there to have that goal line stance was everything. Now, the Cowboys shied away from motion and moving CeeDee Lamb around. They didn't exhibit and exude the 14 personnel nor the 13 personnel. They got cute and they became pass happy. They stayed away from my philosophy of 24 to 27 attempts by Dak Prescott. And this is no shade at Dak Prescott, by the way. No, they threw the ball for 39 times, and that is not the recipe for the Cowboys to be efficient because of the way their offensive line play. And on top of that, because of the way their wide receivers are. We like what Michael Gallup brings to the table, but he shows levels of inconsistency at times. Noah Brown, even though he was able to catch a nice ball on the last drive on the edge there, shout out to him. He is still at times inconsistent. The most consistent player that we have in the wide receiver department or receiving department are 2 guys, and they are CeeDee Lamb and Dalton Schultz. And even with their levels of consistency, sometimes lack of focus, cold starts, you will see a derail at times of their skill set. On top of that, shout out to Tony Pollard for cracking the first time of receiving a touchdown pass as well as running one. Tony Pollard been the catalyst of this team on the offensive side of the coin. He is still your most explosive guy. And your dirty yard guy, you got to look at what Ezekiel Elliott brings to the table. Now, the Cowboys got away with this one. I would take an ugly win over a beautiful loss. I get it. Look, the moral victory from the Texans, they may be happy and say, hey, they're 1-11 now and 1. And they went tooth and nail with the Cowboys, but got to keep in mind, they can have their moral victories. But the Cowboys got to sit back and look into the mirror, as Jerry would say. Not mirror, mirror. Look into the mirror and say, okay, how can we improve X, Y, and Z? Now, we had a slew of injuries to occur. The main injury, of course, Jonathan Hankin, big boy down inside. We don't know how long he will be out. On top of that, it appears that Terrence still may be out for the rest of the year, but they were prepared just enough to insert Jason Peters on that final drive to stand tall. And I'm not finna talk about Josh Ball. We don't have to go down that pathway of breaking him down, because we already knew who Josh Ball was during training camp as well as preseason, right? So the Cowboys, I know that the NFL, they say it's the war of attrition. Nevertheless, we also got to understand that when you take a win that obviously that you could have lost, you just got to be able to stack that inside of you and say, hey, we got away, but the hard work paid off of what we did in training camp. The hard work paid off of what we did through the week of practice. Even though the win is not weighted the way we want it to, a win is a win. 5 years from now, nobody will be pulling up the fact that the Cowboys only won 27-23 against the Texans. It's going to go down as a W in the history book, right? Nobody going to remember these little small things, but the players should stack these things together and say, man, we need to be better in this avenue. And the whole philosophy of Kellen Moore being pass happy, he need to figure out what's the identity of the Cowboys? Are we a pass team or are we a run team? And somehow Kellen Moore need to understand that, hey, if we're going to lean on our running backs, then lean on the running backs. But if we're going to pass the ball, then pass the ball. Pass the ball. If that's the philosophy, it's too late in the season to be wondering and thinking who you are and what you do best. This should already be solidified, Cowboy Nation. So we got a lot to do. We got a lot to grow on. We got a lot to improve. And the Cowboys, unfortunately, don't have a lot of time. So let's continue to figure out ways, Cowboy Nation. We shouldn't be apologizing for winning. Look, this is the National Football League. Figure it out down the line. Let's continue to grind. Let's continue to find out ways that we can become better. Look back at this and say to yourself, man, we got off on this one. Let's prove to the world that this was just a hiccup and be ready for the next game. It's 3 phases of football: special teams, offense, defense. Real talk is really 4 phases: the coaching staff. And the coaching staff in this game, in the bending but don't break in philosophy of the defense, help propel us, and the resiliency of the offense from Dak Prescott on that final drive, that 98-yard drive, was one of the main reasons why we were able to win. Nevertheless, we got to get back and we got to look back at these things, or the flaws that we had, and correct these issues so that we can be ready down the stretch. That's been my time. I really thank you all for yours. DC for life. Salute.